Hello, welcome to another Kits and Bits scale model and build. In this instance, it's the Tamiya 135th Panther Ausf. I really loved building this kit. I would 100% recommend it to anybody who's an armour fan. In fact, I would 100% recommend it to anybody who doesn't usually build armour, just to give it a bit of a go. As is usual with tanks and armour kits of this age, we have started with the suspension and the wheels. The Panther also suffered from the road wheels, and for those armour modelers out there, I don't think I need to explain what that means. Once the wheels were done, we started adding on the external detail at the rear, such as the stowage boxes and the exhausts. We then moved on to some of the other details, such as the hatches, vision slits, and the handles. Up next was the barrel cleaning kit, various other details, engine hatches, and after all this had been done, we could then move on to the turret. The beauty of this kit is that it blends buildability with detail. There's no internal detail set, no fiddly internal gun set for the turret, which means that for the newbie or for somebody who just wants to build for the sake of building, it's an ideal kit. Before the base coat, I put down a generous layer of chipping fluid. After building the turret, it was time to move on to the base coat. This of course was Vallejo Rot Brown. This was the colour that all German armour was painted before it was given its camouflage colours. After dialing down the air pressure and over thinning the Tamiya yellow, it was time to do the marbling. I wanted significant chunks of red to be showing through the yellow, even when the blend coat was applied. This is so that the blend coat isn't just one flat colour, it has tonal variation. The blend coat was then added using exactly the same thinned down paint. This gave me the ability to be able to control the thickness of the layers. After 3 very thin, controlled layers, I finally had the effect I wanted. That was of a very well worn base coat of paint. Next up, I just gave these rubber tracks a flat coat of AK Interactive gun metal. After that, I thinned the same rot brown I used as the base coat and then applied it to the tracks. Once dried, this will give a slightly vaguely rusted look. The edges of the drive sprocket were then painted silver, as these are where the paint would flake as they come in contact, and the idler wheel is the same. The rubber edges of the road wheels were then painted using Tamiya rubber black. If you want to give it a slightly more realistic look, you can dry brush over it with a slightly lightened rubber black. I didn't do that in this instance though, as I'm going to absolutely cake it with mud. Now here is where I do have to give a word of warning. When I was checking my sources, I couldn't find a tank with these colours at all, which is the green and the brown and the yellow. However, the only photos I found of this specific tank were in a plain green and yellow camouflage scheme in Kursk. So just a quick note before anybody jumps on me in the comments saying this is not the right camouflage scheme and these are the wrong colours. Yes, I know. I just like it with the green, brown and green because it looks good, and also I like freehand airbrushing, so there's that. This was actually my first ever build using Tamiya paints. I bought the Tamiya paints specifically for this build with the colours that they had suggested. Unfortunately though, it also meant it was my first time using hybrid acrylics, which did take a little bit of getting used to, having only used, I think, the Vallejo Air and those types of paints before. But I will say that I did find it a whole lot easier, and I did get a whole lot keener on airbrushing after using these paints. Now we move to finishing up. The tracks were added, the decals, which were thankfully few, were added. I think people who are returning to my channel will know how much I loathe these horrible things. The exhausts were then painted Vallejo Model Air Rock Brown again. It was the same colour used throughout this entire build. I did mean to put more detail in it, but by the end of the build I was just like, I'm going to leave it because, you know, I thought it looked good and I didn't want to mess about with it, so... The tools were then painted using a variety of colours from the Panzer Ausf Vallejo set. I started with the places where I thought would get a reasonable amount of wear, like the hatches, the sides, the corners, the covers, all those sorts of places. As you can see, I've used a mixture of a very, very hard old bristle brush that I used to use for, I believe it was using PVA glue. So it had gone all stiff and gunky and not much use for anything except obviously taking off paint, and a cotton bud. Once this was done, I went over the side with a sharpened kebab stick, although you could probably use anything that's been sharpened and got an edge on it. Maybe an old airbrush needle will work, just to put in some realistic scratches and scrapes. Once the first layer of scratches and scrapes were done, it's time for some artificial highlights. So we break out the Tamiya panel liner. Now, I'm absolutely positive that pretty much anybody watching this video has no need of me to tell them why or how this product is used on model kits. But in case there are anybody out there who is a newbie and is wondering how this is used, it's used on places where there would be shadows. This is because light works differently on smaller models than they do on the real things, so we have to artificially create it using products like this. Once this was done, the excess was wiped away with Tamiya X20 thinner and the rest was blended. Weld seams are notoriously bad at keeping paint on them, which means that the paint often chips off and shows the weld underneath. Now, because weld seams don't rust, it usually means there's bright silver patches where the weld seams are on armour, tanks, etc. Specifically World War II tanks. This is not necessarily a bad thing though. I think it gives a little bit of extra depth and definition, and another way to give a little bit of realism to your model. For this I've used AK interactive weathering pencils. This one is silver in this case. In my honest opinion, it's the only one out of all of the AK weathering pencils that work. Once the weld seams were highlighted with silver, I've let them dry for a bit and then gone over them with a quick wash of Tamiya brown panel liner fluid, which of course I absolutely did not forget to film. Having finished that part, we're now moving on to the oil paints. In this case we are doing a dot filter. I've only used one colour in this instance because I want to make it look like rain streaks rather than actually mottle the colour and give it a little bit more depth. Once the paint has been adequately brushed in and blended, then the wet brush is used to thin it out and make it look much more realistic. This effect can be used on any vertical or sloped surface. I think it's a really great effect. I use it on all my armour because I just love the soaked, wet, rainy effect that it gives. Again, now to create another false layer of highlights and lowlights, I'm doing the bottom of the hatch there dark sepia. And I'm going to go along the top with a little bit of light so it's got some contrast. So the bottom of the edge looks darker, the top of the edge looks lighter, and that creates a light dark effect. And now the reason I haven't really done any detailing on the tracks or the wheels. Because of mud. So this AV Vallejo acrylic mud is really a texture. It's not really the right colour for me in my eyes. I would have thought that proper mud would be a darker colour, but that's not an issue. We can darken it up using panelized fluid and some oil paints a little later. For the moment, we're just after the texture and consistency of a really dirtied up tank that's been through the mud of Ukraine. The mud was applied anywhere it's going to be seen, and I mean anywhere. It's on the tracks, it's on the back of the tank, it's on the side skirts, it's on the wheels, it's everywhere. Just like mud tends to get when you've been through big old splashy muddy wet puddles. Of course we need to represent dry mud as well as wet mud, which is where the Revell dry weathering powder comes in, and I absolutely love using this stuff for dust and dirt and dry mud and everything in between. It's absolutely fantastic. It's such a cheap product and it lasts so long. I applied this to any sort of area that I think the mud would have dried relatively quickly, i.e. the upper parts, the hull, the turret, those sorts of places where you're not going to see a lot of mud getting to, but where there is going to be some mud and it's going to dry fairly quickly. After doing the dry mud effect, it's now trying to put some wet mud again over the top of it just to complete the effect. Once this was done, the Tamiya panel liner was used again, not only to fix it in place, but also to give it a wet look. Because it dries semi-glossy, it's going to have the effect that the mud is still wet and that all the pigment that we put on earlier is the dry, dusty, muddy stuff. After that, it was just a case of doing the mud splashes and all that sort of stuff that you would happily get when, you know, driving a 30-ton bullet magnet through wet muddy puddles, I suppose. This was done all over the body of the tank, front, back, sides and rear. Now we move on to my first ever time doing scratches. Having watched many a night shift video and his complete mastery of the art of brush scratching, I thought I'd give it a go. I was a little bit kind of about it because I'd never done it before, and from my point of view at this good, the tank was looking really, really good and I didn't want to mess it up, but I kind of, you know, gave it a go. So using the tiniest brush I could find, I popped on a little dark grey to go over the scratches that we'd made earlier with the chipping fluid. Quickly found that holding the brush normally is very, very hard to get the right weight, so I held the brush a little further down and this was instantly much, much better. And now for the final touch, the rust effects. In this instance, it's Vallejo acrylic rust effects. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over all the little dings and scratches that we've put on, and then we're going to blend it using acrylic thinner. this is not only going to tint the area of where it's scratched, it's going to tint the area around it, which makes it look like the rust is actually underneath the paint as well, like you've probably seen on cars when they're rusty. The blending here is the magic of the process. This is where it all comes together and comes alive. If you don't get this right, then the look of the rust will be too heavy and it'll look wrong. Like on this part, for example, I think the rust look is too heavy. I think the rest of it looks okay, but this particular bit here is too heavy. So that's it for another Kits and Bits scale model and build. I hope you've enjoyed what you did. I massively enjoyed this build. Also, I hope you've learnt something. If you have, please leave a comment below in the section. It really helps us with Big Al, the algorithm, you know, and getting seen and getting out there. And since I'm having to rebuild my channel, this is really going to help so much with getting my numbers back again. Thank you to everybody who's continued to show support. But for now, here's the glamour shots. If you like what I do here, please don't forget to hit the like button. If you don't like what I do here, hit the like button twice, just to be sure that YouTube knows. Also, please don't forget to subscribe, comment and share. These all help with letting people know that were subscribed to my channel before, after the unfortunate incident, that I'm back and making videos again, and hopefully we can see them appear on the channel. Also, it spreads the good news to other people who don't yet know about my channel. Also, don't forget to hit that notification bell. It lets you know every time I release a video. It's absolutely free and it absolutely helps the channel in a way that I just can't describe. Thank you very much for all of your support. Thank you very much for encouraging me to come back. I really do appreciate it. I couldn't do any of this without you.